I'm Mike Doran. I'm the director of the Middle East Center at the Hudson Institute, and I'm joined today by our senior fellow, Bernard Haykel, who is a professor at Princeton and also, I would say, the number one expert in the world on Saudi Arabia. And I don't say that just because you're a senior fellow here at Hudson, Bernie. I think you are universally regarded as the number one expert. And we wanted to get you for a talk today to help us understand what just happened in Washington with the visit by Mohammed bin Salman. So, Bernie, welcome. And why don't you just start by giving us your thumbnail assessment of what happened last week? It seems like quite a significant event.
Thank you, Mike. Gosh, I hope I live up to your expectations. Um, I'll tell you, I think that the visit by the Crown Prince was a very big success for him for several reasons. First, this was his first time returning to the United States after 2018, and he was given the equivalent of a state visit by the President of the United States and, with a flyover, a horse guard, and all that sort of thing. And, that played very well back home for him. He's on a drive to push nationalism as the glue, the ideology of the country. And you could see a lot of Saudis extremely proud of the fact that their country was being, and their leader was being feted in this way in the United States. So, all politics are local. Domestically, it played very well for him. And he has been, as it were, rehabilitated. He also engaged with the press at the press conference at the White House and gave answers to several questions that were asked. One of them on the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, where he explained his position. I think all of that, meant that he came across rather well. More substantively, though, less on the level of symbolism, he got what he wanted when it comes to AI, when it comes to artificial intelligence and chips, very advanced chips without restrictions. This is a big deal for him because he thinks that that's really going to be a game changer for his economy and the transformation that's underway in Saudi Arabia. So there were a lot of agreements on that. He also wants ultimately a treaty, a mutual defense treaty with the United States. That he did not get because it requires Senate ratification. He did get an agreement on mutual defense, the details of which are not entirely clear because they haven't been made public. And he was offered non-NATO allied status by the president. So his long-term goal is to obtain a full strategic alliance with mutual defense with the United States. That is something that every Saudi leader has pursued from the very beginning. And he wants to accomplish that. It's never been written down. There's never been a written agreement between the United States and Saudi Arabia. The closest we've gotten to anything written is this agreement that was signed last week. And he has a long-term, as I said, a long-term goal of being in full kind of alignment with the United States. He would like the Saudis to be considered by the United States in the same way, say, the UK is considered or Japan. That's his aim. And so he got a tiny bit of that, not fully all of it. And then he met with journalists off the record. He met with people in Congress as well, and he met with think tankers. So for a 48-hour visit, which is basically how long he was in town, he did, I think, rather well for himself. Now, what did the United States get in return for all of this? So the U.S. got a promise from him of $1 trillion in investments in the American economy. I think that is just more kind of hot air than an actual dollar amount. Because if you listen carefully to what he said again at the White House press conference, he linked every investment that the Saudis would make in the U.S. with the transformation back home. In other words, he sees the investments in the U.S. companies as tied to deployment of say data centers back in Saudi Arabia. All of it is to do with what's happening domestically. And he doesn't have $1 trillion to spend in the United States, or for that matter, anywhere other than in his own economy. So he gave, the headline to President Trump of $1 trillion, but more specifically, it was clear that whatever money would be spent, which would be certainly in the hundreds of billions of dollars, would be money that would be directed to his own economy in collaboration with American companies.
Your list of the items on the agenda, the security, AI, it's missing the what I think most people put as the third element, mainly cooperation on the nuclear front.
Yeah, there seems to have been an agreement that was signed on the nuclear front. Again, we don't know the details. I suspect it's more to do with civilian nuclear power generation. Um, this was signed actually by their Minister of Energy, the MBS's half brother. Um, they want to build a civilian nuclear energy in the kingdom so that they can actually release more oil to and gas for export. Um, there was no discussion of, at least not publicly, of whether they gave up on the question of enrichment or not. I know that in the case of the Crown Prince, he's willing, I think, to give up on enrichment if he gets a U.S. nuclear umbrella, uh, which would probably take the form of U.S. nuclear weapons being based in Saudi Arabia.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
yeah.
I heard from what I believe to be a very reliable source that there was that there was disagreement on the enrichment question, and that the talks were slowed down by that. The Saudis wanting some undefined or unspecified, I guess I would be a better way of saying it, level of enrichment, and the Americans saying they couldn't agree to that because they were demanding no enrichment from the Iranians, and that the conversation was stuck there for the moment, but that in general the body language from the administration was very positive. So what you're giving now is an added element. Does what I say comport with what you understood?
Yeah, I mean, the Saudi position is if the Iranians get to enrich, we want to be able to enrich. Not least also because the Saudis are convinced they have huge uranium deposits and that there is money to be made in enrichment and export. I mean, there's a big question mark as to whether that's actually true in terms of the economics of exporting enriched uranium. Um, but they will be willing to kind of put off the question of enrichment as long as that hasn't been settled with the Iranians. If the U.S. gets the Iranians to agree to zero enrichment, then they won't insist on enrichment themselves. And they will agree to something like what the UAE agreed to, which is the famous, 1, 2, 3 agreement, where they
Right.
just basically import the stuff and don't enrich it themselves.
You're raising the issue of the nuclear umbrella is very interesting to me. Um, let me tell you how I interpreted the Saudi. Pardon me, I got a frog in my throat. The Saudi Pakistani agreement a few months back, and see, one, if you agree with it, and two, if it helps us understand this negotiation. I took that to be since Pakistan is a nuclear power, and there was this defense alliance signed between the two of them. I took it from the Saudi point of view to be part of a negotiation with the United States about the nuclear and defense tracks of the negotiation. And I took it to be a kind of subtle or not so subtle feint toward China, since Pakistan is such a good ally or has such close relations with Beijing. And I took the message to be the between the lines to Washington from Mohammed bin Salman. I want to work with you. I want to work with you on defense. I want to work with you on AI. I want to work with you on the development of my country. But there are tracks that I have to go down. I have to develop the economy of my country. I have to take care of its defense. And if you're not going to do this with me, then I have to go elsewhere. I don't want to do that, but those are my choices. Is that how you read that signal? And is that how Donald Trump is reading the signal?
I agree with you. I did read it that way. I mean, also because the last time the Saudis, made a jet, did this thing, the feint, as you called it, towards China, it worked remarkably well. So the last time they did that was in late 2022, early 2023, culminating in a détente agreement signed with Iran under Beijing's aegis, with the help of China. And that really got the U.S. administration at the time, the Biden administration, it got its attention, and all of a sudden, the Biden people were willing to begin to negotiate on a number of agreements, a number of which were signed last week. I mean, all of those agreements were being negotiated with Biden. So, the gesture towards China, which is one can call it a kind of a mock hedging strategy, really did work with the Americans. I think the Pakistani thing is the same, and exactly as you said, because Pakistan has all this Chinese backing and technology and armaments. It's the same sort of a feint. Um, as to whether it worked with the Trump administration, I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether Trump, unlike Biden, whether he, fell for this move. Um, like a kind of poker style move. Um, because he clearly didn't then say, well, you can have all the things that you want. He didn't even give them, in fact, an executive order, which he had given Qatar earlier this
Oh,
year,
right,
right?
right, right.
So he seems to be holding out on some things when it comes to the Saudis. Although my sense of President Trump is that he is stuck in a 1970s, mid 1970s view of the Arab Gulf states, that these are people with endless amounts of money and that they can throw this money around, which was true back then. It's no longer true today.
Is it not a little bit truer with regard to UAE and the Qataris?
Yeah, it is truer with respect to the UAE and the Qataris because they're smaller states with very small populations relative to the Saudis. The Saudis don't have those resources as they did back in the 70s.
Because they have a population of 35 million that's very young, and they have a real economy that they have to worry about.
Yeah, and they're trying to build out all the infrastructure for this diversified economy and logistics and all kinds of tech and transportation, all kinds of other areas, manufacturing. And in the 1970s, there was just only so much the Saudis could do with the surplus capital they had accumulated because there weren't many investment opportunities in the country. Now the investment opportunities are all there. And so they're pulling out of the US stock market. I mean, if you pay attention, you see that the Saudis actually are moving their capital back home because they
Mm.
have to.
Oh, wow. Fascinating. But from an American strategic point of view, I mean, I understand the attraction of hard currency, dollars, but from a strategic point of view, the prize in the Gulf is Saudi Arabia, and the main prize, I would say, and not the Qataris and the UAE. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Saudi Arabia is certainly the 800-pound gorilla in the region, in the Arab region. I mean, as I think there are really three powerful states in the region that matter most to the United States that are allies, and they're Turkey, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. And the U.S. needs Saudi Arabia for, say, if it wants to make peace or end the wars in the Sudan, if it wants to rebuild Gaza, if it wants the Syrian regime to stabilize and to prosper, and for Syria to prosper, Lebanon. I mean, all those countries, require the United States to coordinate with Saudi Arabia on policy.
That's certainly how I see it. I see that the platform on which the United States stands in the region has three legs. The three main legs. I don't want to denigrate anyone else, but the real stabilizers are Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Israel, and that's the complex that we need to be thinking about strategically.
Yeah, and the Saudis are finally sort of trying to get their act together militarily. They're trying to build up their military capacity. They're trying to diversify their economy. I mean, they're trying to do all the things that I think the United States has wanted them to do for a very long time, carry their own water when it comes to their own defense. So, and I think the Trump administration, but even the Biden administration before, recognize this and wants to encourage them to pursue this, this ambition, because then they really become a serious ally that you can turn to.
It's interesting that you mentioned Sudan because I heard an interesting little bit of gossip, which I think also think is true, and that's that after after they got through their major business, President Trump turned to the Crown Prince and said, "So, is there an issue that you would really appreciate my, what's the one issue that you would really appreciate my help with?" I assume it's Gaza. And he said, there is an issue, but it's not Gaza, it's Sudan. And the president uh, was taken by surprise by this answer, wasn't on top of the Sudan issue, and immediately had all of his aides come in and begin briefing him so that he understood what the Crown Prince was talking about. Did you hear that as well? Is that the?
I mean, not. I mean, I heard it from the president himself. The president gave a long speech at the Saudi U.S. Business Forum, which is the second day of the visit in the
Uh-huh.
Kennedy Center, and the president basically said, I asked him, and what was on his mind, and Sudan came up, and the president said, I knew nothing
Oh,
about.
so my inside story was the
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
that,
And
yeah.
and and it was MBS who briefed him as well and explained to him the situation. And what's interesting about that, I mean, there are a couple of things that are interesting. One is that it tells you that if you're sitting in Riyadh, you know, what's happening in Gaza or Lebanon is not really as important as what's happening in your immediate neighborhood. And in your immediate neighborhood, you basically have Yemen to the south, and you have Iraq to the north, and
Uh,
you have Sudan to the west. And Sudan, the Saudis have about 1 million Sudanese residents in their country, and as you know, Sudan is a horrific civil war. One side of that war is being backed by the UAE, by the United Arab Emirates, and the Saudis are very upset that that war could lead to even more refugees crossing the Red Sea and coming into Saudi Arabia, and it's very destabilizing. So they're not on the same page when it comes to the UAE. When it comes to the Sudan, also the Iranians have been meddling in Sudan by supporting one side in that war, in that civil war. And so the Saudis really would like to see that war and one way that can happen is if the US puts pressure on the UAE, on the Emirates. And so I think that was the ask. And so the question is, will President Trump actually talk to the UAE about this or not? I'm not,
okay.
yeah, I'm not sure.
I didn't completely understand that angle. I thought the Saudis were more mediating. Interesting. That's very, very, very interesting. What's your guess about what how President Trump will respond?
So I would think that President Trump, because again, he thinks of the UAE, Qatar, and Saudi as these three huge sources of investments in the United States. He's going to be very careful with all three of them in terms of what he asks, because he just doesn't want to offend them. Now, serendipitously, I think the UAE itself is realizing that there's a tremendous amount of brand damage to the country from its association with what are called the Rapid Support Forces
who
in
are
the
who
in
are
the
who are conducting some horrendous murders of
of
innocent
Africans.
civilians.
That's
Yeah.
right. They're killing African civilians. Um, they're Arab and they're killing sort of African Sudanese, and um, and so I think the UAE itself is realizing that this is not a good policy and is think rethinking its policy on the Sudan. So as I said, serendipitously, it could be that the president doesn't need to push very hard or say much to get the UAE to change its policy on the Sudan and hopefully find a way to de-escalate this conflict.
How important from a purely American national security point of view, aside from alliance maintenance, how important how much importance do you personally place on the Sudan?
I mean, in terms of U.S. security, I mean, look, the Red Sea is a very important, uh, maritime passage. You have the Houthis on one side wreaking havoc with shipping, and they can do that again. They've stopped recently, but they can start up again quite easily. Um, I think the main problem for aside from the humanitarian question of what's happening inside the Sudan, Sudan can produce a lot of refugees into Saudi Arabia. It already has produced a lot of refugees into Egypt. So, in the immediate, it's not, a strategic threat to the United States, but it's a symptom of increasing instability and chaos in the region, and you want to stop as much of it as possible. Not least because as an ally like this, like the Saudis, want it to end because it threatens them.
And as you mentioned, it sucks in the Iranians, potentially also the Russians.
Yeah,
Could be a source of refugee flows to Europe, but also Russian and Iranian domination or at least interference in Red Sea shipping, as we already see with the Houthis.
exactly. Yeah, that's
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the economic development of Saudi Arabia, both from the domestic Saudi point of view, but also from the U.S. point of view. I don't see personally, given what we said earlier about the three legs of the stool, I don't see anything but a positive story here in this Trump Mohammed bin Salman summit. Is there anything that, from an American strategic point of view, gives you a little bit of discomfort or raises a question mark?
No, I mean, I think that the issue eh, um, is for the Saudis to. I mean, right now you see that the Crown Prince is very strongly associated with President Trump and let's say with the Republican Party more generally. And I think that that's potentially a problem for the Saudis. I think that they need to reach out to the Democrats. They need to be able to explain to the Democrats that, in fact, the diversification of the country, the success of the country, uh, whether it's to build up its military capacity, to build up its economic resources, to continue playing a stabilizing role in the oil markets, all of that is good for the United States, regardless of who's in power in the White House. And I think that's something that the Saudis really need to work on because at the moment they're very strongly associated with President Trump and with all that that means, in terms of potentially, getting people on the Democrat side just angry with them, uh, just for that. So they
I
need to make their case a bit better to the entire American public.
I I don't think I disagree with you, but I mean maybe because I'm a Republican, I tend to see it this way. It reminds me of when people talk about uh, left-wing Israelis and left-wing pro-Israelis accuse Netanyahu of having turned Israel into a partisan issue. But as I read it, it was the Democrats, the progressives, who did that. I mean, the vilification of Mohammed bin Salman and of the U.S.-Saudi relationship, as I see it, it really came from the Democrats. And really, when the Biden administration came into power, they ran a campaign to vilify him and everything that he was doing. They pinned it on the Khashoggi murder, but that was already old news by the time the Biden administration came in, and they resurrected it um, in order to distance themselves from him, but also in order to pressure him to accept their courtship of Iran. And I think that was really the big message to him was you better straighten up and fly right with us on our engagement of Iran, which he did, which which culminated in the famous reconciliation with Iran, brokered by Xi Jinping, or performed under the auspices of Xi Jinping. Which I regard as American strategic malpractice. We took our core, our key Gulf ally, and pushed them toward the enemy of the United States, Iran, and worked and that worked only to the benefit of Beijing. To the Biden administration's credit, they partially recovered and started then the process of reconciliation, which culminated under Donald Trump in the summit last week. That's how I read it. Do you personally disagree with that reading? That
No,
I'm
no,
not I'm not arguing with your suggestion that the Saudis do need to reach out to the Democrats, but I think the Democrats need to rethink what they've done.
yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you. I just think that Israel has a much, despite, the feelings about Netanyahu, or, how one-sided the support is for Netanyahu, Israel still has, significant support amongst the American public, regardless of how, say, the left on the Democrat Party feel about it. Saudi Arabia doesn't have that luxury. I mean, they just don't have any support in the country,
Right,
say amongst evangelical Christians or others. Um, and they have no constituency in the country. So
right,
they have a more difficult case to make, I think. And it's a hard I mean, it's a case that has to be made in terms of hard power, in terms of strategic, the strategic interest. They can't appeal to sort of Judeo-Christian values. They can't appeal to history, to any of that. And so they're at
right,
a disadvantage vis-a-vis Israel. And you saw this, when October 7th happened, regardless of how felt and his people felt about Israel, they immediately stood with Israel.
right.
The Saudis don't have that luxury, I think.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a really good point. I actually think that's part of what our job at the Hudson Institute is to do, actually, is to make the very clear hard power case for the relationship with all of our major allies, um, even when public opinion is wary of them. Um, the Let's talk a little bit about domestically this development program that Mohammed bin Salman has. I want to talk to you about it on two levels. One is the raw economic element, but I also want to talk about it as a component of his nationalist vision. And do you? Um, it's interesting for me to hear you say that Saudis are proud of their, to see their country represented in this way. Can we talk meaningfully now, not just about the popularity of Mohammed bin Salman, but about the existence of a Saudi nation? This would be the only nation in the world that is named after a family. So, can we say that it exists?
Well, it's a work in progress, I think, and it's something that for the longest time, Islam was really the central feature of the country's identity, and you did have a sense of nationalism that existed amongst people, but it was never fully articulated. Now it's fully articulated, and it's something that the leadership is pushing, and I think it does exist. It just needs more. It needs more to be to it needs to be dressed up more. It needs more content to so that you can see its shape. And that's something that, the school curricula are being rewritten, history books are being rewritten, all kinds of new holidays have been set up. Um, and I think it will end up being something that does work. But it's not fully articulated. So you don't have, like the equivalent of, Turkish nationalism in
Right.
Saudi Arabia yet, but it is something or Iranian nationalism for that matter, but it is something that they're working on, and I think it will come together.
I was
I also don't. I think the thing about the name of the country's name being named after a family. I mean, Jordan is the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan.
right.
Morocco also has, so kingdoms in the Middle East and in North Africa often are associated with a family. I don't think that's a source of weakness, as many people think
Mm,
it is, because in fact, in the case of Saudi Arabia, the country wouldn't exist if it weren't for the efforts of this family. I mean, it's this family that united, what was otherwise, a bunch of warring tribes and very divided geography. So the country does owe its existence to this family. So, and I don't think that you get Saudis who are upset that they're called Saudis because
right.
it's the name of a family.
I was amazed last time I visited, and I don't have the I don't have the sense that you have of the culture and the nuances. But I think I talked to you about this before. There are a couple things that really astounded me. One was the as you mentioned, the rewriting of history and the new holidays and things that were unthinkable before, like tourism to pre-Islamic sites, archaeological excavation of pre-Islamic sites, and so on. The development in museums and other public places of a new nationalist narrative, and the evident excitement of people when you talk to them. I'm talking about people on the street about this project, because you can tell when people are um, mouthing the talking points that they think that the people in power want them to talk, and when they're talking from the heart. You can tell. That's not a
Yeah.
thing you can hide. And but I didn't understand as an outsider where this was coming from. So, what is the sociological glue or basis on which this top-down nationalist rewriting is basing itself? I mean, I'm trying to say there's something. This isn't. It is a top-down process, but clearly it's being met from a bottom-up response. And so, what is
Yeah.
that bottom-up response?
Well, I mean, I think lots of things, go into this. First, you do have a country that's had a school curriculum, that's had a very active scholarship program, sending hundreds of thousands of Saudis overseas to study. I mean, this is a government that has done a lot for its people, and that has redistributed oil wealth in all, without taxation to the population. I think football, soccer plays a
Uh-huh.
really important role also in the culture of the country. It's a very young population. It has certain interests in consumption habits. They love McDonald's, for instance. Uh,
I
you
did
know,
not know that.
yeah, they love, there's a particular kind of a chicken also that fried chicken called del bake that they like. I mean, there are all kinds of elements to this, to the culture, including poetry, um, songs,
So a
singers and so
shared
on.
culture from region to region that is really that,
Yeah.
and when they go abroad, they recognize each other as this.
Absolutely. They
Yeah.
they do, and there's a national dress. Also, they all dress, and a certain uniformity of accent, the Arabic that's now It stopped being as regional, and now they all speak with, a very similar accent. There's a dominant culture also from the center, which is where the government is. So all of this, has percolated to the entire society. And most people work for the government there. So there's a kind of uniform experience over time that has led to something called Saudi. It's still difficult to define it exactly what it is, but when you
Uh-huh.
see it, you kind of recognize it right away.
Uh-huh.
And when
Uh-huh.
others see it, by the way, Emiratis or Qataris or Lebanese, you immediately know that, this person is a Saudi.
Uh-huh. That's really interesting. Now, it's interesting to me too that um, Mohammed bin Salman's nationalist project and Donald Trump's nationalist project, kind of ideologically and in terms of just the ethos of the two men, they dovetail perfectly. It seems to
Yeah.
me,
Yes.
which is remarkable. I mean, it wasn't planned. It's just sort of the zeitgeist in the world today.
That's right. That's right. And they're both about their own, so it's America first, Saudi first. Also the thing about Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, is that he really is very, very jealous about the question of Saudi sovereignty.
Mm,
Like he really, cares about his country. He doesn't understand leaders in other places that don't dedicate themselves to serving their people, their own country. For instance, in Lebanon, you have lots of different political leaders who are basically working for their own little faction or their own little sect. He doesn't appreciate that. He only appreciates people who, are working for their country, who respect other countries' sovereignty, don't meddle in other countries. He's a sovereigntist in that sense, and that has real implications. It means basically that he won't use Islam anymore. Pan-Islamist ideologies or ideologies that transcend borders to score points or to meddle in other countries' affairs. He won't do that. Like he sees, for instance, what's going on in India with the BJP, with the Hindu nationalists. He will never say anything about what's going on inside India, even though in the past you would have had Saudi kings who would talk about the situation of Muslims in other countries. He doesn't do that because he expects the Indians and the Chinese and the Americans not to meddle and talk about affairs in his country. He's very much that kind of person.
oh, yeah, it's fascinating. Now that translates, I think, into a number of attitudes that you have highlighted for us in the past. One is a kind of disinterest, I would say aggressive disinterest in Lebanon, whereas in the past the Saudis saw the Hariris as their project, and he seems to have pulled back from that. Um, uh, Also, the potential, I would say, uh, relative disinterest in the Palestinians. Uh, but Gaza remains a hot button issue for everyone in the region. But it opens up the potential for greater Saudi-Israeli cooperation down the line once the emotions of Gaza have subsided. I didn't hear much talk about the Saudi-Israeli relationship coming out of this summit. Did you hear anything? Was it in the background? Did MBS and Trump talk about it?
No, I mean, I think, Trump would very much like the Abraham Accords to be expanded. He would like to see normalization, but he does realize that while MBS would like to normalize with Israel, there are certain things that have to happen before he can appear, to his own people, to the wider public of Arabs and Muslims, as someone who, got something for the Palestinians in return for normalization. He doesn't want to be accused of being a traitor to the cause of the Palestinians, and I think it's because the issue resonates with his own public. He can't just completely ignore his own public. Um, I also think that, in his ideal, like if MBS, could have a magic wand and kind of wave it over the Middle East, this is what the Middle East would look like. You would basically have a zone, from Turkey, all the way down through Arabia and then across to Iraq, not Iran, unless the regime changes its ideology. But certainly through Sudan and the Horn of Africa, you'd have a zone of stability and peace and prosperity. And Saudi Arabia would be kind of the hub, this kind of central node in this zone of economic prosperity. But it would also have a security element to it. It would be a zone that is where American allies coordinate, collaborate with each other, sort of under CENTCOM, and there would be interoperability between all the kind of different military systems, and they would help defend each other. And in that zone, Israel would very much be part of the security architecture, and more importantly, even the economic architecture of the region. And so you would have Israeli tech and defense and other elements of Israeli economic prowess, engaged with Saudi Arabia and engaged with the other countries of the region. That's kind of the vision, and it would be a vision that would also have very strong military deterrence against the spoilers, against the countries that are destabilizers. Here, you need to read Iran, you need to read the proxies of Iran, the non-state actors, whether it's Shiite militias in Iraq or the Houthis in Yemen, and basically try to tell the Iranians, you either get with this program and you're part of this zone, or if you aren't, then you're going to be, punished very severely if you meddle and if you try to destabilize.
Well, that's a vision we can all get behind, actually, uh,
Yeah,
and
I,
I'm sure it resonates with Donald Trump.
Yep, I think so. And I think so. And I think actually this is the vision that he's managed to convince Donald Trump of, which is why, the president wants the ceasefire in Gaza, why he wants that conflict to end. I think he actually buys into that sense of what the Middle East ought to look like, not least because, it also appeals to President Trump's kind of entrepreneurial
Right, right.
instincts, which is, this is a place where we can build and so on.
Now, when it comes down to the question when it comes to the question of Saudi-Israeli normalization, I heard two different takes coming out of the summit, from Saudis actually, and I don't know where to put the emphasis. One take is we have to have, in order for there to be normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia, we have to have an irreversible pathway to a two-state solution. There's no other way. And the other one I hear is, um, once the Gaza settles down, the emotions, the Saudi emotions about Gaza settle down, we can start looking for ways to cooperate more and move toward normalization, even if there isn't an irreversible pathway to a two-state solution. In the mind of the Crown Prince, how fixated do you think he is personally on irreversible pathway to a two-state solution? And I
So,
asked this, sorry to interrupt. I asked this because personally, I don't think the Israelis can possibly give the Saudis an irreversible pathway to a two-state solution.
right,
It's not in the cards.
right. So, what I've heard is that if Gaza, if we move on to the second stage of Gaza, right, uh, which would involve, the withdrawal of Israeli troops from all of the rest of the territory, this international security force being deployed, and the beginning of investments and rebuilding and all that. So the minute that begins, the Saudis and the Israelis would start talking, and you would have all kinds of agreements, but much lower than normalization, and that more formal agreement on normalization would happen when Israel agrees to this pathway to a Palestinian state, and begins negotiations. So normalization wouldn't happen only after a Palestinian state is established, but rather at the very beginning of the process of a negotiation between the Israelis and Palestinians, and the Saudis wouldn't interfere with the negotiations or with the outcome of the negotiation. In other words, they wouldn't predetermine what a
Mm,
Palestinian state needs to look like. And then once normalization begins with these negotiations, it would be staged. It wouldn't be like a full-on normalization like you had with the UAE, where you would have embassies and exchange of visits between the leaders and all that. It would be staged over time, um, to like a lot of other things that MBS has done in Saudi Arabia, for instance. If you look at how he handled the question of women driving, again, it was very kind of progressive, or for that matter, alcohol.
mm.
The So now, if you're if you're a high status non-resident, a resident in the kingdom, you have kind of like the golden residency. You can buy alcohol. There's a
Mm.
shop in the diplomatic quarter that will sell you alcohol. So, all of this is being done in a very gradualist and staged process, and I think the same would apply to normalization with Israel.
Uh, what about Israeli relations with others? Say, for example, if there was an agreement between between Shara in Damascus and Netanyahu in Jerusalem, uh, MBS wouldn't do anything to obstruct that
Yeah, no, not at all.
over concerns about the irreversible pathway to a two-state solution, right? What I'm trying to
No,
say
no,
is,
I don't think he would. I don't think he would object to any. Look, as I told you earlier, he's a sovereigntist. So if the Syrians decide to do something, that's their business. It's not his business. He's not going to interfere.
wow. Well, listen, this is so interesting, and really appreciate all of your time. Let me just ask you as we close out here. Well, two things. First of all, let's not close out yet. Is there anything I should have asked you but didn't? Is there anything that you wanted any insight that you had that you really wanted to deliver to us that I didn't allow you to?
No, I think no, no. I think we talked about pretty much everything. I can't think of any angle that we've sort of missed out on. I
Oh,
mean, there were agreements, there were other agreements that on mining and rare earths. So,
mm.
his vision also is to create supply chains that are independent of the Chinese supply chains, right? So, in that respect, he's also telling the Americans, you know, you don't have to create supply chains that are in the United States. You can also use Saudi Arabia as a source for breaking the kind of hegemony and monopoly that the Chinese have over certain materials.
Well, actually, you've raised an important question then, which I should have asked you is how do you think this is being read in Beijing, and do you think that Beijing has a card that it can play? If we look at this on a certain level, this is a contest between Beijing and Washington.
Yeah.
There's a contest going on for the orientation of Saudi Arabia. We started the conversation with the assumption that Mohammed bin Salman wants to be aligned with the West. I mean,
Yeah.
that's I think that's so clear that that's the preference. But he's he has the history that he has. He has the geography that he has. And if America is not going to be there for him in the way that he needs it, that's acceptable, then he'll go somewhere else. But the first choice is the West. How how is that going to be read in Beijing? And do they have a card to play to try to put a wrench in the works between the United States and Saudi Arabia?
Yeah. So, um, you know, MBS's preference for America and for the West is not based on sentiments. Okay, it's based on a kind of clear-eyed view of what his national interests and his security needs are. In looking at how Israel performed in the last couple of years in the war, and looking at how the U.S. coordinated with Israel in its on its defense. He sees superior military power on full display,
Yeah, who
right?
doesn't?
And he knows that that's what
Only
he
only Tucker Carlson doesn't see that.
yeah, and he sees that that's what he wants that, right?
Yeah,
He
yeah,
wants that, and he knows that even though Beijing is offering all its material and its kit and its military stuff, that it just doesn't compare to what the Americans have on offer. So that's why, and he also knows that the U.S. has this capacity to deploy forces and force projection that the Chinese don't have. And
mm,
he also knows that the technology, when it comes to AI, that the US has is superior to the technology of the Chinese. So again, he's not doing the US any favors. He just sees
right,
reality for what it is.
right.
Okay, and that's why he wants to be tied there. Now, of course, at the same time, he has a very important trading relationship with the Chinese, but he also knows that the Chinese, are even though they're offering all their hardware without any restrictions and so on, and their military stuff and so on, the Chinese have very intimate ties with the Iranians.
Mm.
They buy Iranian oil. They cut deals with the Houthis, so that their ships are not attacked. That, in other words, that the Chinese are not players on the international scene that they're not stabilizing players. They're not kind of they don't have they're kind of not real stakeholders in the international system as he would like to see it kept in play. They're not for the security of maritime shipping. They don't seem to care about that. They,
Right.
they play with the rogue states that are pushing that are invading other countries, whether it's in the case of Russia or in the case of Iran, a country that has zero respect for the sovereignty of other countries and backs proxy militias. He doesn't want to deal with a country that doesn't sort of stick to certain, the kind of rules-based international order, which he sees as the one that the U.S. supports. So the Chinese are by far a kind of second or third, partner, not the preferred partner of the country.
Okay, so just to take us home now, Bernie, how do you think, 20 years from now, we look back at this summit, it's going to be understood? Is it going to, did we just witness a turning point where, since from 9/11 until yesterday, Saudi US relations have been, um, I wouldn't say, a state of turbulence, but the old, oil for security guarantee, was called into question. The place of the kingdom, in American foreign policy was uncertain. And it looks to me like now we've settled on a new sort of understanding of what our relations are with each other, an understanding that on a platform on which we can build. Or is this just an interesting, is this an interesting stopping point on a road that we don't know where it's going?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that the Saudis still are very important players in international oil markets, and they have huge resources that they invest and deploy and so on. But the future of and so we do see, I mean, I do see that there's an inflection point here, or at least a new vector, a new orientation, but it depends largely on, I think, two factors. One is whether the Saudi development, modernization, the economic transformation and diversification plan actually works. I mean, whether
Mm,
they can turn themselves into something more than the central bank of oil or an oil superpower. So if they
hmm
become a major industrial, technological, logistical hub, then the relationship will be based on something much more than just an oil for security thing. So that's one factor, and I think the jury is out on that as to whether they'll
hmm
succeed or not. Um, so domestically for a number of reasons, to do with human capital and the fact that the region is in turmoil, et cetera. Um, the other is whether the United States can still maintain, its dominance in technology and military capability. Because, if the Saudis see a decline in American, ability, military, technological, they'll look elsewhere. I mean, they're not wedded to us.
Right.
Um, for again, they're not. It's not about sentiments. It's about really hard power calculations.
All right. Well, I think that's a beautiful, or let's just say, I don't know how beautiful it is, but intellectually it's beautiful, and it's a very clear, I think, picture of where we stand today. Thanks a lot. You didn't disappoint us in the least. I think you answered absolutely every question we had authoritatively, and I really appreciate it.
Pleasure.